Hello and welcome back to drive&rpm. Today, we are not standing on a test track or looking under the bonnet of a new supercar. Instead, we are standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into what might be the abyss of the European automotive industry. We need to have a serious, unfiltered conversation about the structural collapse of the European supply chain. A crisis that is currently unfolding with terrifying speed and which carries implications for every single market in the world, from Sydney to Los Angeles. The numbers coming out of the European Union this week are not just bad. They are catastrophic. We are talking about the erasure of over 100,000 jobs in the automotive parts sector. To put that into perspective, that is the equivalent of wiping out the entire population of a medium-sized industrial city. And these are not just any jobs. These are high-skilled, specialized manufacturing roles that have underpinned the European middle class for 70 years. The European Association of Automotive Suppliers, CLEPA, has confirmed that this figure of 100,000 job losses has been reached over the last 24 months, with the pace of redundancies accelerating dramatically as we entered 2026. But to understand why this is happening, we cannot simply blame market forces in a general sense. We have to look at the specific toxic cocktail of bad policy, technological disruption, and geopolitical maneuvering that has led us here. We are seeing giants of the industry, companies like Bosch, ZF, Continental, Valeo, and Forvia, announcing massive restructuring programs. These companies are the silent engines of the car world. When you buy a Mercedes-Benz, a huge percentage of that car was actually engineered and built by these suppliers. If they collapse, or if they are forced to move all their production to Asia, the Baco Made in Europe, the label, becomes nothing more than a marketing sticker on a product that is entirely foreign. The root cause is threefold. Firstly, the volume of cars being manufactured in Europe has collapsed and shows no sign of returning to pre-pandemic levels. The factories are running at 60% capacity, and in the world of heavy industry, that is a recipe for bankruptcy. Secondly, the energy crisis in Europe has made the production of energy-intensive components, like glass, steel, and aluminium, prohibitively expensive compared to competitors in China or even the United States. But the third and most critical factor is the transition to electric vehicles. An internal combustion engine is a masterpiece of complexity, requiring thousands of parts and thousands of hours of labor to produce. An electric motor is frighteningly simple. It requires a fraction of the labor. The industry knew this shift was coming, but they did not anticipate that they would be undercut so aggressively by a competitor that has been preparing for this moment for 2 decades, China. The Chinese supply chain is not just competing with Europe, it is obliterating it on cost. And this brings us to the most controversial news of the week. At the very moment that European workers are being sent home, the European Union is signaling a capitulation to Chinese imports. We have received reports that Brussels is moving to scrap the high tariffs on Chinese EVs, which were meant to protect this crumbling industry, and replace them with a minimum import price agreement. This is a decision that defies economic logic from a protectionist standpoint, but makes perfect sense if you are a politician terrified of a trade war. The market reaction was immediate and telling. Shares in BYD and other Chinese manufacturers surged in Hong Kong immediately after this news broke. The markets know that if Europe replaces tariffs with a price floor, the Chinese win. They win because they get to keep their high margins, they get to stay in the market, and they avoid a trade war that could have hurt German luxury car exports to China. Let us delve deeper into why this minimum import price mechanism is being viewed by many analysts as a betrayal of the European worker. A tariff is a tax collected by the state. It artificially raises the price of an import, making the local product more competitive. And the money collected can technically be used to retrain workers or invest in local industry. A minimum import price, however, works differently. The EU effectively tells a company like BYD, you cannot sell this car for 20,000 euros. You must sell it for 30,000. On the surface, this prevents the Chinese from undercutting Volkswagen or Renault too drastically. But look at the mathematics of profit. If BYD can manufacture that car for 15,000 euros and they are forced to sell it for 30,000, they are making a massive 15,000 euro profit per unit. They get to keep that extra cash. Instead of paying a tax to the European government, they pocket the difference. This gives Chinese manufacturers a war chest of cash to reinvest in marketing, to build better dealership networks in Europe, and crucially, to buy up the distressed European suppliers that are currently going bankrupt. It is a transfer of wealth from the European consumer directly to the balance sheets of Chinese corporations, facilitated by EU regulation. Why would Brussels agree to this? The answer lies in the intense pressure coming from the German automotive lobby. The CEOs of Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW have been pleading with politicians to avoid a full-scale trade war with Beijing. The reason is simple. China is their biggest market. They are terrified that if the EU slaps huge tariffs on Chinese EVs, the Chinese government will retaliate by banning or taxing German luxury cars. So, we have a situation where the European supply chain, the smaller companies making pistons, gearboxes, and braking systems, is being sacrificed to protect the profits of the major car brands who want to keep selling limousines in Shanghai. It is a civil war within the European industry. And right now, the suppliers are losing. The result is what the CEO of Valeo has called a Darwinian struggle. But it is a struggle where the playing field is heavily tilted. European suppliers are burdened with high energy costs, strict carbon regulations, and high labor costs, while their competitors in the East benefit from state subsidies, cheaper energy, and a vertically integrated supply chain that controls everything from the lithium mine to the final assembly line. This creates a hollowing out effect. The factories in Germany, France, and Italy are closing. The production is moving to Turkey, to Morocco, or back to China. We are witnessing the deindustrialization of the automotive sector in real time. And once these factories close, once the blast furnaces are turned cold and the tooling machinery is sold off, they do not come back. The expertise is lost. The communities that relied on these jobs for generations are left with nothing. This is not just a business story. It is a social crisis in the making, and the irony is palpable. Europe pushed aggressively for the Green Deal and the transition to electric vehicles, assuming it would lead the world in this new technology. Instead, it effectively handed the keys to the kingdom to China, the only nation that had secured the raw materials and the battery technology necessary to execute this transition at scale and at a low cost. We must widen the lens and look at what this European collapse means for the rest of the world, specifically for our viewers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. The global automotive market is fracturing into distinct blocks, and the strategy you see in Europe is a direct response to the shifting sands of geopolitics, particularly in relation to the United States. With the political climate in Washington turning increasingly protectionist and the threat of blanket tariffs on all imports, European and Chinese alike, looming under the new American administration, Europe feels isolated. The European Union has calculated that it cannot afford to fight a trade war on two fronts. They cannot fight Washington and Beijing simultaneously. This geopolitical reality is what is driving the minimum import price compromise. Europe is trying to appease China to keep trade lanes open because they fear being shut out of the American market. But for the United States, this signals a widening rift. If Europe becomes a dumping ground for Chinese technology, the US may move to isolate the European automotive industry further, treating European cars as Trojan horses for Chinese software and battery tech. This leads to a world where a BMW built in Germany might face hurdles entering the US because its battery supply chain is inextricably linked to China. For Australia, the situation is even more fascinating and dynamic. Australia has no domestic car manufacturing industry left to protect. It is the ultimate free market battleground. As Europe erects these complex barriers, whether tariffs or price floors, Chinese manufacturers may find it slightly more difficult to offload their immense production capacity in the EU. Where will those cars go? They will flow to the path of least resistance. We predict that Australia is about to witness an unprecedented flood of Chinese vehicles. If BYD, Chery, and MG face volume caps or price floors in Europe, they will divert that stock to Australia, likely leading to an aggressive price war. While this sounds good for the Australian consumer in the short term, cheaper cars are always welcome. It poses a long-term strategic risk, as traditional Japanese, Korean, and European brands are undercut and pushed out of the market. The diversity of choice diminishes. Australia could become the first Western market to be almost entirely dominated by Chinese automotive technology. And what happens when the competition is gone? Prices will inevitably rise. Furthermore, the collapse of the European supply chain affects the availability of parts for European cars globally. If you own a Volkswagen in Sydney or a Peugeot in London, the spare parts for that vehicle are made by the very companies that are currently firing 100,000 workers. We could see a future where maintaining a European car becomes significantly more difficult and expensive as the supplier base shrinks. As we conclude this deep dive, we must return to the human element of this story. The figure of 100,000 jobs is likely just the beginning. Industry analysts predict that as the internal combustion engine is phased out, up to 500,000 jobs could be at risk in the European automotive sector by 2035. The current measures being discussed in Brussels, these price fixes and trade compromises, are essentially putting a sticking plaster on a gunshot wound. They are trying to manage the decline rather than reverse it. The sad reality is that the European automotive industry, as we knew it in the 20th century, is dead. It is being replaced by a new reality where the value is in the software and the battery, two areas where Europe has allowed itself to fall behind. The decision to potentially drop tariffs in favor of a price floor is a clear signal that the EU prioritizes the survival of its diplomatic relations and the sales of its luxury brands over the integrity of its industrial base. It is a gamble that may preserve peace in the short term, but at the cost of the continent's economic sovereignty. For the mechanic in Birmingham, the engineer in Stuttgart, and the assembly line worker in Turin, the message is clear. The protection you thought you had is gone. You are now competing directly with a state-subsidized juggernaut, and your own government is holding the door open. We will continue to monitor the share prices of BYD and the other giants, as their performance on the stock market is the truest indicator of who is winning this war. Right now, the graphs are pointing up in Hong Kong and down in Frankfurt. That tells you everything you need to know. This is a pivotal moment in history. We are watching the torch being passed, not willingly, but seized through superior strategy and industrial might. I want to know what you think. Is this the inevitable result of the free market, and Europe just needs to adapt? Or is this a failure of government to protect its own people and its own strategic industries? And for my viewers in Australia and America, does this make you wary of buying European cars, knowing the industry is in such turmoil? Leave your detailed thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. This is Drive in RPM, bringing you the reality behind the machine. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next report.